is your unspoken definition of culture fit actually hurting your organization? Well, in this video, we're going to break down what we mean when we talk about whether someone is a culture fit, why your current approach could actually be hindering your growth and preventing your success, and what you should be doing instead. So I want you to imagine a scenario where you're interviewing somebody for a new position, or maybe you're thinking about somebody who you recently hired who's in your organization, and you're questioning whether this candidate or this new employee is truly a culture fit. And I see this all the time in the tech world, and particularly in the startup scene. This idea, this phrase gets thrown around a whole lot when we're talking about whether a candidate, whether employees, whether your teammates are actually a culture fit in an organization. And you start to wonder whether this person is a culture fit, but you don't necessarily have clear parameters to evaluate whether they are or they aren't a culture fit. And most of the time in young companies, when we're talking about whether somebody fits in culturally, at best, this is, again, a nebulous or undefined area when we're trying to determine whether or not somebody is a culture fit. And it's usually determined by somebody's gut feeling on whether or not this person fits in. And that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, when you're talking about an interview process or evaluating a recent hire, worst case scenario, saying that somebody is not a culture fit is just this go-to cop-out excuse to not hire somebody, or even worse, to potentially fire somebody because you've determined, or somebody has determined, that they're just not a culture fit. So based on what I've seen, based on what I've researched, based on what I've experienced, I started to dig in and try to figure out what it actually means when somebody in a startup or in a small business, when we're talking about whether or not somebody is a culture fit. And in most scenarios, what this means for company leadership, whether they realize it or not, is asking this question. If somebody is a culture fit, is asking the question, are they like me? Or are they like us? Are they similar to the rest of our organization in one or more observable ways? And you're asking yourself, is this person going to fit in? And I want to put some attention on that language, because language is so important. And when you are trying to determine if somebody is a culture fit, you're asking, are they going to fit in? And again, whether we realize it or not, we're trying to find similarities in people to those of us who are already on a particular team. And this can be really damaging in a lot of ways, because you're trying to find someone who fits in with what you already have. And I'm going to, in a minute, go into why fitting in is not really what you should be looking for. And again, when you are asking, is this person going to be a culture fit? Are they going to fit in with our culture? Well, fitting in is not really the right approach when you're trying to grow a company. And in fact, fitting in is the exact opposite of what you should be looking for if you want to find somebody who's going to show up 100% and really bring their A game. Now, why is that? Well, I'm going to defer to one of the experts on this, Mrs. Brené Brown, who is a multiple-time New York Times best-selling author and an expert on shame, vulnerability, and a wide range of other topics. And when Brené Brown talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging, which we're going to get into here in a minute, she talks about how fitting in is actually the way to deter people from wanting to show up fully as themselves. And why is that? Well, because fitting in her words, is all about assessing and acclimating, assessing and seeing how things currently operate, and then acclimating to exactly the way things currently are. And assessing and acclimating, if you're acclimating, what are you thinking about? Well, all you're thinking about is what you should say, what you should do, who you should be, what you should wear, what not to say, be, and do. And if you're constantly assessing and trying to acclimate, or as an employer, if you're trying to get people to assess and acclimate, you're basically telling them how not to be an individual and how to just honestly assimilate and become part of the Borg, for all my sci-fi nerds out there. But you are intentionally asking somebody to not be themselves, and you're asking them to sacrifice their individuality in order to then assimilate and become a part of this, just hive mind, which is not really what you want to do if you're trying to hire a talented individual to bring all of themselves to your organization in order to make your organization better. And you might be in the position where you get to be the decision maker, and you are the one who's passing judgment on other people, and you're the one who is really determining whether or not they are a fit. But I want you to really stop and think about a time recently when you felt a little bit uncomfortable being yourself, a time when you couldn't really show up as yourself. How well did you really show up? How much of your true self, of your talents, of your abilities, of your opinions, of your intelligence, how much did you really show up the last time when you didn't really feel comfortable being yourself? Whether it's in a social situation, in a professional situation, whatever. Maybe it was on a date when you didn't really feel comfortable being yourself. How much of you really showed up? I'm guessing it probably wasn't a whole lot. How much did you really feel like you were on your A game? And how much did you feel like you were really being a little bit of someone else and not really being yourself? Now, take that and apply that to these people that you are trying to gauge and judge on whether or not they are going to fit in. And if you're trying to get other people to just fit into your idea of how everybody should act, dress, talk, then you're basically trying to shortchange people on being themselves. Now, next, I want to talk about why it is that we do this naturally, why we naturally have this behavior to try to see if people are going to fit in or not. Because honestly, it's not really anybody's fault, and it's totally understandable behavior. See, our brains are wired to try to protect us from harm, from threats. And in the absence of real threats, we don't have a saber-toothed tiger coming and trying to eat our young and steal our food and kill us. We oftentimes allow our minds to manifest and create fake threats to equilibrium, to the safe, comfortable way that things are currently. And so when we're looking to see if somebody's going to fit in with our ideas of what normal should be and what our culture fit is, then what we're doing is we're just trying to protect any number of things. And again, I'm not judging. This is a totally understandable thing that happens. We're trying to protect ourselves first and foremost. We've got our identity in our workplace. We've got this reputation that we've built up over time. And maybe our reputation has, part of it is in guarding the culture of the organization. And so we feel responsible for protecting the culture that we've built. We're also potentially trying to protect our team members. We've got these relationships with each other and the people on our existing team that we've built up over time. And we want to make sure that we protect those relationships and those other people so those other people don't feel alienated because they're already a part of our team and a part of our so-called culture. And so we're trying to protect all of that. And then last but certainly not least, we're also trying to protect our organization. Growth is a scary thing. And when you are looking to bring new people into an organization, or you've just hired some new people, you are trying to make sure that these decisions that you're making are the right decisions and that you're not putting the organization at risk. So again, by trying to protect ourselves, by trying to protect the people we work with, and by trying to protect the organization, we are doing understandable things, and we are, being overly cautious, which I totally get. And nobody would fault anyone for being protective of these things. But we have to be able to take a step back and determine if we are really judging people and really evaluating people on the basis of whether they could belong in our organization or whether we're trying to force them to fit in. And it's super easy to get comfortable with these things that we're protecting, especially when that comfort really starts to feel safe for us. But what do I mean when I talk about getting comfortable and feeling safe here? Well, here's where the problem is. When you are assessing candidates, or you're assessing some new hires, your existing employees, on whether or not they are this culture fit, and you're really trying to figure out this culture fit thing, most of the time you're doing this because you're trying to grow an organization from where it is currently to some future state. And we want to grow. We all want to grow. Any, go-getters, any achievers, the A players that we like to believe that we are dedicated to and motivated by growing. But here's the problem. There is no growth without change. If there's been tremendous growth in your organization from when it was 2 or 3 people to where it is now, that growth has been remarkable, I'm sure, but it did not come without some drastic amount of change. If you think about this in terms of, say, some professional basketball or baseball or football team, whatever sport you may be into, if your team has ever gone from last to first, it's experienced tremendous growth in the way that it plays the game. But that growth has not come without some drastic change. Even personally, individually, if you've experienced some growth in some area of your life, maybe you've moved on from a toxic relationship, or maybe you've transformed your body and you've lost a ton of weight and put on a bunch of muscle, or maybe you've experienced some significant mental or emotional or spiritual growth. That growth has been amazing, but when you think about it, you're not even remotely the same person who you used to be. That growth has not come without some significant change. And so we have to make sure that we're not afraid of changing whenever we're trying to grow, whether that is in ourselves or in an organizational, in a company sense. So we've established that there's no growth without change. And I need you to understand, and I hope that you will understand, that if you try to resist the change that naturally accompanies growth, like it's coming whether you like it or not, if you try to resist that change, well, then you're going to set yourself up for failure. You're going to get stagnant. And instead then of growing, you're going to not just stay exactly where you are, but you're going to go in the other direction. Because if there's one thing I've observed about anything in life, it's that anything in your life is either growing or it's dying. You can't just have things stay the same. If you are trying to achieve transformation in your body, for example, either you're moving closer towards that goal or you're moving farther away. If you are trying to get emotionally stronger or mentally stronger, any given day, you're either getting stronger or weaker. You're growing towards that goal or you're going away from it. So there is no homeostasis where we just sit and there's both no growth and no death. We're either growing towards something or we're shrinking away from it. So keep that in mind when considering that if you try to resist the change that comes with growth, then you're just going to set yourself up for failure. So if trying to see if somebody's going to fit into your little box is not the right way to approach culture fit, then what should you do instead? Well, I've already kind of hinted at it a little bit, but instead, what I would like you to consider doing is ask yourself this question. Ask yourself, do I have an environment? Have we created an environment where this person that I'm going to hire or this person that I have recently hired, do I have an environment where this person feels like they can belong? You know, as human beings, we like to believe a lot of times that we're super 100% independent, but the reality is that we are chemically, neurologically wired for belonging. We need to feel like we belong. Now, how does belonging differ from fitting in? Well, again, fitting in and belonging, they might sound similar, but they're actually diametrically opposed. That's right, they're opposites. Whereas fitting in means assessing and acclimating, assimilating into the Borg. Belonging means that you get to show up exactly as you are without compromise. It means never betraying yourself for other people. It means not betraying who you are. It means being true to who you are. It means not betraying your values and your principles. Now, this doesn't mean that belonging means that you can be stubborn or obstinate for no reason, but it means that you can recognize whatever boundaries you may have in your life, what your principles are as a professional and as a human being, and not sacrificing those boundaries and those principles for anybody. That's what belonging means. You know, there's a reason that countless studies show that the top organizations where people want to work are universally described as those places that allow people to do what they call bringing their whole selves to work. So that means if you are a musician or you have musical tendencies and musical talents, you get to bring that into the workplace. It means if you're a bit of a jokester, then you can bring, that sense of humor into the workplace. It means that whatever your interests are, whatever your principles are, whatever your values are, who you are as a human being, it means that you get to show up in the workplace as your whole self. So, in order to determine what your culture is really, not just what your culture might be, honestly, I could do an entire series of videos and podcast episodes on how you could develop a strong and healthy culture, and that might be something we do down the line. But in order to really determine what your culture is, I'll give you the short version. First of all, we can talk about what culture is not. And I've got a long laundry list of those things too, but I can tell you what culture is not. Culture is not your benefits. Culture is not your perks. Culture is not ping pong tables and free lunch and a barista, on site. Culture is not stereotypes like fast-paced startup culture. Culture is not lame phrases and platitudes like work hard, play hard. Culture is none of these things. Hell, culture isn't even a set of shared values. And that last one, you might be thinking, wait, if it's not that, then what is it? And I can tell you the best way I've ever heard company culture described. And that's this. Company culture, your culture as an organization, is not a collection of shared values. Your culture is a collection of shared behaviors. It's how you treat each other. It's how you treat your customers. It's how you behave on a day-to-day basis. So it's not just the values that you think you have. It's the values that you demonstrate in your behavior as an individual and as an organization. And so if you can think of your culture in terms of what are the behaviors, how do we treat our customers and how do we treat one another, I think that's a pretty good starting point for determining what your current culture really is and whether this person, be they a candidate or a new employee, whether they belong, bringing their whole selves in with that culture that you've actually set up. So in closing, to recap just a little bit, when we talk about culture fit, a lot of times we're kidding ourselves and we're fooling ourselves into thinking that people have to fit in and assess and assimilate, to acclimate into our culture. And that being a culture fit means that they need to be a certain way, speak a certain way, dress a certain way, behave in a certain way. And really what that's going to do is that's going to hurt us, because we're going to discount or dismiss people who actually would bring a ton of value to our organization and potentially bring a ton of diversity in opinion, in background, into our culture. And so I recommend taking a critical eye to what you really mean whenever you are thinking internally, when you're talking about or when you're thinking about, well, is this person a culture fit? So, and ask yourself, am I looking for acclimation? Am I looking for assimilation? Or am I thinking about values and principles that we actually exhibit as an organization in our behaviors on a day-to-day basis? Not just the things we say we believe in, but the things we actually follow through on. And I hope that you will take some of these ideas from this video, or if you're listening on the podcast from this episode, and that you'll actually write some things down and determine, okay, when I am thinking about culture fit, am I thinking about somebody belonging, or am I thinking about making them acclimate to the way things currently are? I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have, I hope you'll share it with somebody else who might learn a thing or two, be inspired, or take a lesson or two away from this. And if you've enjoyed it, I hope you'll drop a comment in. And like I said, please share it with others. I'd love to get this message out. I've worked with some great organizations who have amazing cultures of behaviors that they actually exhibit. And I've also seen and worked in plenty of places where culture meant a ping pong table. So until next time, I'm Sean B. Martin, signing off.